Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope you're doing very well today. I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, to answer a viewer question that I received some months back, and I must apologize for the lateness of my reply. I hope you can forgive me. The viewer is Nicholas Chan, and he very kindly gave me his permission to answer his question, which is this. Daisuke, what do you generally find is the most important thing in a film for you to enjoy it? I've recently been mulling over my head about what actually pulls people to prefer one film over another, and I've come to the realization that it is all incredibly complicated, since it is the age-old question of aesthetics. What is beauty? I'd say it's completely emotional. But what emotionally pulls you to like films can be broken down to the elements that make up a film: narrative, plot, cinematography, mise-en-scène, which is controlled by our environment and genetic makeup. What do you think? This is a very interesting question, and Nicholas, thank you very much for asking it. I received it and I've been thinking about it for a number of weeks actually, and those weeks turned into months. I didn't forget about it, but I did think about it a lot, and so I apologize for the lateness of this reply. What do you generally find is the most important thing in a film for you to enjoy it? That's a very deep question, and one that I think will differ depending on the person who's answering the question. I think we all might have our own personal views on this. Therefore, it's a little bit, I must admit, it's a little bit difficult for me to explain, because I think my own reaction is wholly subjective to my own personal experience. And I think you describe it very well. You say our reactions are controlled by our environment and genetic makeup. In other words, you're referring to both the external stimuli that makes up the environment in which we find ourselves in a particular point in time, and then the internal, those that you refer to genetic makeup, but maybe those sort of character traits that we might have that have developed as we have grown older. Of course, those character traits and feelings and the way we react to things is, of course, perhaps a byproduct of our upbringing and also our environment, where we were brought up, by whom we were brought up, in what ways we were brought up, etc., and the experiences that formed the way we look at the world, that sort of thing. And as you know, these variables can be so great in number and scope that the overall makeup of a person can really change and really can be very different from person to person to person. It's quite fascinating, actually. I'm no scientist, but generally speaking, that's external stimuli and the internal. But the internal also is heavily dependent on external factors that have, for whatever reason and through whatever circumstances, have shaped our experiences and have led us to the point that we find ourselves now. So all this stuff goes on, right? And I think you're right, and you're onto something, that it's maybe a particular moment in time in which we find our internal feelings and emotions. At the same time, the external factors, the stimuli that exist, there is some kind of interaction between these two, perhaps, that lead to some kind of feeling in our head. And based upon that feeling in our head, we are open to certain things more than others. We are, therefore, we prefer certain things over others. I think that's a very that's a view that I think that I personally have, in terms of where I find myself with wanting to watch a certain film or enjoying a certain film over others. It's really difficult, and also it's really difficult to generalize, because I think it also depends on our mood, and at least my own mood and my own sort of tiredness level, the time of day I want to watch a film. That really makes a lot of difference, I find. I find that I have a certain tendency to watch a certain type of film, let's say in the morning or early in the day, whereas I have a tendency to watch a different kind of film in the later hours, for instance. So for example, I don't find myself watching horror films early in the day or in the morning for whatever reason, but I find it's a lot easier for me, for whatever reason, to want to watch a horror film or a scary film late at night, or it's when it's dark. And I think, practically speaking, that has to do with the fact that usually my family will be asleep, and I usually don't want to, not usually, I certainly don't want to watch a horror film with my children. And so I'll usually watch the rather intense films, or horror films, or dramatically intense films, that sort of thing. I'll leave those to the late wee hours when everyone is asleep, and so my children don't have to, there's no chance of them walking into the room, for instance. So that's a practical reason why I tend to do that. And I think my own feelings have therefore gravitated towards feeling that way when it's a little bit dark and it's late at night. I'll tend to want to watch certain more intense films. But during the day, I don't have, I don't worry about watching those sorts of intense films. Instead, I will concern myself with watching more quote-unquote family-friendly fare. In other words, films that are not necessarily films that I would find objectionable to show to my children. And so I find myself, based on my own practical needs, with this particular example, preferring to watch certain films over others depending on the time of day. And I don't know, I think that's something that probably isn't uncommon. It certainly wasn't the case when I was younger, but now that I'm older and I have a family and I have certain concerns that I have to be aware of every time I'm watching films, that is a view that I've grown to have, especially now when I find myself older. As far as other times, I think when I find myself, for instance, particularly tired after a long day at work, for example, I won't necessarily find myself wanting to watch a film that requires a high degree of concentration on my part, or a high level of intensity, or any kind of film that would require an extensive amount of, let's say, background research on my part. For instance, there are some films, or many films, regarding which the subject matter is such that I have no personal information, I have no knowledge, and so oftentimes I will have to, not often, many times, I will have to do a lot of research on my own in order to research the background of a particular topic, or maybe a certain production history, or something of that nature. Just very, very cursorily, of course, and then getting into the film, and then from there further expanding on whatever research I'm able to do. So, and so with that requires a lot of energy, of course, and a lot of effort. It's very fun, and it's very exciting, and it's certainly very enlightening. But I find myself less engaged, and I find myself less wanting to pursue that kind of film when I'm tired or exhausted after a long day at work, for instance. So instead, I will want to watch something that I tend to know when I'm feeling a little bit tired. And so that means it'll be a film that I'm usually quite comfortable with, and a film that therefore is something that I can just fall into and relax with, as it were. So also my tiredness level will affect what it is I want to watch as well. But those examples aside, I think more fundamentally, how do I determine what it is I want to watch? How do I determine what to choose. If I have a number of films I can choose from, how do I determine that I want to choose this film over that film or that film or something like that? What goes into that choice? And it's what you say. It's very complicated. I don't know. It's a little bit hard, I suppose. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a sociologist, and I can only speak through my own personal experience. So I suppose my comments aren't very deep at all. And so if they are a little bit lacking for you, then I sincerely apologize. It's not my intention. But just based on my own feelings, I suppose I could say that it's probably, for me anyway, it's akin to food, and it's akin to my hunger. Choosing what to watch or having a preference over one film over another doesn't necessarily mean that I dislike the film that I didn't choose, right? In other words, even though I choose film A, that choice in and of itself does not negate my liking for film B, the one that I didn't choose. It just so happens that at that particular point in time, for whatever reason, I wanted to choose film A over film B. And that could be due to one or more of a number of factors. Maybe it's a certain narrative that attracts me, a certain subject matter that attracts me. Maybe it's a certain actor or actress that attracts me, a certain artist involved that might attract me, or other aspect that might attract me to this film over this film in a given point in time. The same is true, I think, for food. Maybe one day I might find myself wanting to eat, I don't know, spaghetti. Another day I might want to eat sushi, right? So for instance, right now, I can say I probably want to eat sushi right now, and instead of eating pizza, right? So if you ask me now what I want to eat, I will choose sushi over pizza. And why is that? Well, I can say, maybe I can say I haven't had fish in a while. I remember I had pizza with my family a few nights ago, and so it's still rather recent, and so I don't want to repeat the same experience so soon after I just ate pizza with my family. Also, I haven't had fish in a while, and I really like fish. And so, maybe today, right now, I want to choose sushi over pizza. That doesn't mean that I dislike pizza. It just means that at this moment in time, I prefer sushi over pizza. So I think it's a similar thing with films and me. Maybe I want to watch film A because I watched a film like film B rather recently, and maybe I'm up for a change. Maybe the opposite is true. Maybe I want to keep on watching films in the same franchise or the same series of films, so I want to keep watching these films over this film. I think either option is possible for film. It's very exciting, but hopefully that I'm making myself clear, and if not, I sincerely apologize. But my point is that it really depends on my mood and where I find myself at a given point in time, and my past experiences, both long-term and short-term, and also another number of different factors that go into it. But I do appreciate the fact that it is, I think, there are so many variables that go into this choice, and that key in further to our own personal experiences, that it can seem very subjective and random, but at the same time I do realize that there is a kind of scientific link between this particular variable and this how it reacts to a particular component of my character, and then how that kind of interaction takes place over a multitude of areas, external and internal, and that whole encompassing of all those interactions come together at one particular point in time to create the choice that I might have for, let's say, film A over film B, or sushi over pizza, right? So that is to say that I agree with you that it's complicated. But I think that's how I would generally answer the question that you posed. I think, now that I think about my answer, I think my answer is actually not so good. It's probably quite shallow, and maybe you're looking for something a little bit deeper. Unfortunately, I don't have a strong way of expressing it very well, so I apologize. But I think my sense is that you and I perhaps share a very similar or perhaps identical philosophy when it comes to thinking about why it is we make these choices. It's a very interesting topic, don't get me wrong. I think it's quite fascinating. But as I say, I apologize for the sort of inherent shallowness of my comments, and I hope you can forgive me. But also please note that I really try to answer it in the best way that I can. So once again, I please accept my apologies, but hopefully that might go towards somehow, possibly, perhaps answering your question, Nicholas. So anyway, thank you very much for your great question, and once again, I apologize for the lateness of my reply. For anyone else out there, if you have any thoughts or comments on this great question from Nicholas, please let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear what it is you have to say. Other than that, my friends, I hope you are well, and until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, cheers.